We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. Fellas, I've been attacked. I've been targeted by someone from the Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University. One Jimbo Fisher.
Mechanical,
yeah, my bad.
Keep it. Keep it.
Yeah, leave it in.
Oh yeah.
Jimbo Fisher's out for me, man. He's out for us. He's out for the old day job. No other way to read it other than that.
Yeah, Jimbo Fisher launched what can only be described as a heinous attack against 33.33% of Split Zone Duo LLC.
While it wasn't me. I am so mad.
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't you.
I know.
Surprisingly.
We're all really shocked right now.
At the end of his press conference after the spring game at A&M, the SID says last question, and then Jimbo starts saying, quote, "If it's the last question, better be a good question. I don't need no Houston Chronicle questions. I need a Texags question, a good question. Sports Illustrated is just as bad. Sports Illustrated, that ain't a good one either now. That ain't a good one either. Used to be the gold standard. Daggum. Y'all give me flack. I can't give you flack. Y'all can't take it. God. That got personal." End quote. He was actually being funny here. You know what? We make fun of this guy.
Whoa. We gotta pause real fast and just recognize the dramatic reading that just occurred, or the oration, accent and all.
Good Jimbo, because initially when we talked about doing this,
we
talked about just dropping the video or the sound of the video clip.
Dramatic recreation, I thought.
Yeah,
Alex,
that was impressive.
Alex, can you do it one more time and just do it as fast as you can? I'm serious. Ready?
No. Moving on.
No, come on.
I'll just give you one more. It used to be the gold standard. Daggum. That's the end. That's all you're getting. Anyway, Jimbo was actually being funny, but it was an enjoyable 30 minutes on the internet when people thought that he was launching a serious broadside against the media. But also it's funny because it's, he's joking, but he's not joking. Like he would prefer, he would probably prefer not to get the types of questions that, the Houston Chronicle might ask. He might rather get more fan-centric media, given that he makes $9 million a year and just went 5-7.
So as I understand it, again, this is something where when you're on a beat, you are with this guy, beat writers with the coach. You're with this guy every day for a month in spring practice, for instance. You see a lot of each other. You're around each other.
Right.
So yeah, man, you're gonna get some shit. You're gonna get some ribbing. Sometimes this is done off camera before the press conference even starts. It happens. But apparently, on the beat, there's not a lot of different outlets ask questions, as it was kind of explained to me when I kind of dug into what's going on here, which is also kind of what he's getting at. Apparently, our Fan Nation, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation blogger, is one of the people who asks a lot of questions in press conferences, just in general, in addition to Brent Sweatterman from the Houston Chronicle, who's one of the best out there covering A&M.
I believe he broke Red River to the SEC. We have said this before. This is a good time as a college football consumer to remember that when you see something, even when it is verbatim and accurately transcribed on Twitter, or even just online, maybe it was maybe you saw it cut and paste on a message board, that there is something lost in translation every single time an anecdote or a quote is processed in a different form of media. So if you read this, and I don't mean read it aloud or listen to it on a podcast like Alex just jokingly did, but if you just read this, it would come off a particular way. When in reality,
especially if you work for Sports Illustrated and someone texted you this and asked, "Hey, is everything good?"
Well, even when I first saw it, I was like, I thought of Richard, my co-host, and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna whoop his ass." Not Richard. I'm gonna whoop Jimbo's ass. We're gonna Alex, give me 20 minutes, and no, this was his attempt, and I think personalizing the relationship that he has with that media group. What Richard said is very true. It happens more in baseball because you'll have 160 regular season games plus spring training where you're doing the pre and post game gaggle with the coach over and over and over again. And so you get a little stir crazy. It's spring. I don't know how to say this unless you've covered a team in spring practice. It's just really monotonous. Now, I don't mind this at all from Jimbo. It would imply his behavior that he wants to give, which means that he wants to take, but we know he doesn't want to take. Like we know that he's never really been able to process criticism. So I think this is fun. I think this is it's probably in good spirits. But I also know if I had to make a short list, guys, or like give 2-to-1 odds on the first Power 5 coach that gets super in their feelings and lashes out after losing a game or two, Jimbo's going to be up there, right? Coaches have never been more sensitive about questions about any aspect of their program when they're down than they have been like in this era, which is also ironically, if you're a coach listening to this, this is also the same era where we've had the least amount of access and the least amount of communication with anyone else on the staff or the roster. So it's funny how those two things dovetail. If you're listening to this and you work in college athletics, the more you tighten up, right, the more we're going to have to kind of hit you over the head with direct stuff because we don't get to have that context. We don't get to absorb that context. And then also shout out to TexAgs because look, I'm going to be honest. This was great marketing for TexAgs. I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. Here's why I don't have a problem with TexAgs fundamentally. They will tell you, what is it, Billy Lucci, right?
Oh yeah.
Like that dude will tell you, I am an A&M fan. This isn't a pro A&M outfit. We want A&M to win football games. This is not Woodward and Bernstein. I'm totally fine with that. That's great. When I was coming up in college and sort of trying to learn how to be an independent reporter at my alma mater, there was a guy named Chuck Ronsville. I think he still does it. He ran the Ole Miss Spirit, and he would sit there and he would always get the first question and the last question in every press scrum. And he would lob a softball to David Cutcliffe or Ed Orgeron. And that's what he did. Anytime journalists would accuse him of something, he would just say, look, I want Ole Miss to win football games. I don't care. I am a fan. I am here to help them. And so if you're transparent, it's certainly not my cup of tea. And it's not what I want to do with my life. I'm fine with transparency. Always have been.
No, me as well. And they've created a very good business that honestly is commendable. I've been on the program before, and I've been on the program once. I've been on the program once before. I was surprised.
Like a TexAgs podcast?
I was surprised to be asked, but I said yes. I did go. Almost got into a little tiff with Billy this week because I had made a joke about Jimbo's joke where I was like, hi, Jimbo, this is Alex Kirshner, reporter from TexAgs here. And I just want to ask, how do you do it? How do you smile through it all?
Wait, he gave you shit for that?
Can you believe this is your life? But here's the thing. This is another thing I like about TexAgs. Yes, Billy gave me shit for it. It's because on Maine in public. But do you know why? Because TexAgs represents the A&M fan base, which means being extremely defensive and sensitive at all times.
I thought it was spending money for no returns. TexAgs, I'm here at 38 Godfrey. The DMs are open. Unfortunately, it's like a sewer back there. I will go on a TexAgs. Oh my gosh, Billy, where we at, guy? You want to talk about Ross Bjork? I love to talk about Ross Bjork.
The most ambitious crossover event in podcast history.
Go on
Split zone duo.
How did Alex get on TexAgs before me?
TexAgs, baby.
Oh, I'm furious right now.
Let's link up and build, Billy.
Y'all, hey, the only team that I can make fun of better than A&M is Texas. Just throwing it out there, TexAgs. I'm trying to look pretty and show a little leg right now. Okay.
Well, they're not rivals, so why would you do that?
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Wouldn't it be funny if they did? Wouldn't it be funny if they didn't get potted together? Sorry, another show.
Elsewhere in college sports this week, in college football this week, there is a new conference. We now have a video component to this, so if you're watching it, you can see me making my air quotes with my fingers behind my giant microphone.
You're just confused.
Podcasting is a visual medium.
Yes.
I've been saying it for years.
We've been saying it for a long time. So the WAC and the A-Sun, the Atlantic Sun, that just kind of dropped the Atlantic. They just want to be the A-Sun now. Have 9 schools, I believe it is, who have started to have like a scheduling alliance with each other. I think this was in effect in this last season as well. And it's the WAC A-Sun football conference-ish entity where they're not technically in a league, but they play each other kind of as a league in football. And they have now named their new conference that is not actually a conference. It is going to be called the United Athletic Conference. It rolls off the tongue. The UAC. The schools in that league: Abilene Christian, Austin P, Central Arkansas, Eastern Kentucky, North Alabama, Southern Utah, Utah Tech, Stephen F. Austin, Tarleton State, and Texas Rio Grande Valley coming when they begin their football program in a couple of years. So the thing is, it's not technically a conference because since early COVID days, like spring of 2020, the NCAA has had a moratorium on the creation of single sport conferences. So this league is sort of, it's Schrodinger's conference. It's like they hired Oliver Luck. That's a very conference-y thing to do. They gave themselves a name that has no geographic coherence and just kind of sounds like America sports. That's very conference behavior. And they're going to play 6 games against each other, quote unquote, conference games. But they can't technically be a conference. They thus cannot technically take an auto bid to the FCS playoffs, which I think is, a pretty important component.
Real stupid.
Yeah.
Stupid.
The point.
Real stupid. There are bigger problems with the FCS and its playoff structure than just this, but this would be the latest. Namely, the absence of...
No, I think I'm wrong. And I want to cite Chris Vanini, friend of the program here. I think they do have a playoff auto bid. I think that the NCAA gave them that, and I apologize, and I'll just correct myself live on air. But they are doing that under a waiver. Thank you, Chris. Chris always knows this stuff.
Still, they should still put the IVs and the HBCUs in. By the way,
should that waiver expire, their conference-y privileges would go away. So there's a bit of a governance fight coming, and now they'll be able to wage that fight as the United Athletic Conference. Congrats to all.
I would say sort of the biggest and only note, if you're not a fan of one of these schools, as to understanding this or sort of understanding the relevance, is that you are now seeing like-minded football institutions at the FCS level join together, step over geography and whatever maybe 10, 15, 20-year history they might have, to achieve a common goal of football relevance. That's essentially... So, Alex, you don't have to read the list off again. You can scrub back on your podcast if you want to hear it. Those aren't basketball schools. That's probably the easiest way to look at this. Both Richard and I have done reporting at East Kentucky in the last year. They're one of the schools involved here. They were in, I believe it was either the Missouri Valley or the Ohio Valley. I can't remember. I'm rusty on my FCS affiliations. Also, if you do track FCS affiliations, it changes a lot.
Rapidly. And by the way, these schools don't want to be FCS for long. I think their hope is that they'll be FBS.
So that's where it's headed, basically. So I'll use EKU as an example. They were close to receiving Conference USA membership status. Western Kentucky blocked them after they couldn't go to the MAC. EKU was in an FCS conference with basketball schools, with basketball concerns and basketball priorities, and that's okay. So if you do follow college basketball at all, you know that there is a Big East now, and the Big East, they just won the national title with UConn. So they sort of formed the Big East to be a basketball centric conference, and that's okay. And that's what's happening here on a football level, because EKU looked around a couple of years ago and said, man, none of these schools make sense for us. And so that's why they left and they went independent. They started scheduling a lot of Texas schools. They started scheduling, honestly, FCS programs from football states. And so that's what you're seeing now. How this affects you as an FBS fan, if you're in the G5, I think Alex just rattled off more quality programs than the entire depth of Conference USA, which is something worth looking out for. And
would they still be quality if they came up? Well, that's the thing. They're quality now, but are they still quality when you come up and have to?
I think what they're coming up to, Richard, is let's just say, Alex, let's say this entire Wax-Sun thing, they all moved up. Just I know the rules, I understand the transition, I get it. Let's just say they all did. You're now looking at a quote unquote group of 5 that is too big to measure by traditional standards. So, Richard, my argument is all you're really doing is pushing the FCS up. I'm now using hand signals and motions because I'm on camera, but you are now just elevating that high end of the FCS to a sub F, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Sub G5? This is an argument or a conversation for another day. If you're grading them alongside other CUSA schools, Richard, everybody's going to get their ass kicked for a paycheck from, USC, Oklahoma, or whatever. And then once they start sort of batting it around with each other, I do think most of these programs are on equal footing with Conference USA, minus Liberty spending, so much money.
I mean, you do have, at some of these schools, you have a facility issue.
Yes.
God love you, Eastern Kentucky. you cannot play FBS football games in that stadium. I'm sorry, you can't. So, and they know that, by the way.
Stadium is probably probably the least of their concerns, although it is a concern. Like EKU specifically, it's like independent facilities, like a building. You need a building.
Yeah. So, there are going to be obviously costs moving up, all that kind of stuff. And I know you're talking about hypothetical. I understand what you're saying. But, we had a discussion about North Dakota State along these lines too. Like, do you want to stay down there and win and reliably win? Or do you want to come up and the world changes?
Alex,
and
sorry, what's the bougie school in that list, Alex? Like in terms of like finances? Just off the top of your head.
Bougie school in terms of finances on that list.
I'm not fact checking you. I'm just trying to pose a hypothetical.
Is it one of the Utah schools? Some of those Utah schools, some of the Utah schools have quite a bit of cash behind them. So in this case, Southern Utah and Utah Tech. Utah Tech until recently was Dixie State, and then they realized maybe we shouldn't be called Dixie State anymore.
Whoopsie do.
Gee, wonder why.
Also makes a ton of sense to call yourself Dixie when you're in fucking Utah. The highest end of those schools is not that far away from like Louisiana Monroe in terms of facilities and money. And so this is where I'm getting at, like, we're going to create a middle class. America's killing the middle class, allegedly, but we have to create a middle class in football. We have to. And I think we're getting there to where there are some programs that are never going to move up because of structural or like the Ivies are never going to, they're always going to be the Ivies, right?
Move up. They would think going to FBS is a downgrade for them.
Correct. And then also, like, there are too many things that are bespoke to the SWAC or to the MEAC. They're not going to move into that realm either. And those are extreme examples, but I believe you'll always have an FCS in lower divisions, obviously, as you get into the 2s and the 3s. This is just yet another indication that we need to suss out and better qualify everything below the top of the American athletic conference down to this conversation we're having right now with these schools.
P2, middle, 3, 1, 4.
You're literally just fucking chanting numbers.
We actually did a show recently on the Splitsendo Patreon about Mike Oresco's long journey in college sports and his current quest to have the P5 and the G5 no longer named as such. There's, I think, an extended conversation to be had about it, and we had it on the Patreon a couple of weeks ago. It's right there and it's evergreen. By the way, the Big Ten. Speaking of power conferences playing, in heavyweight classes in this sport, or at least fancying themselves doing that. Tony Petitti is the new commissioner of that conference. Last week, we pulled that old podcaster two-step where we recorded a show in the morning. It was going up in the evening, and in the intervening hours, the Big Ten announced that their new commissioner, or it came out via reporting, that their new commissioner was going to be Tony Petitti. He's a longtime sports media, video gaming executive type. He has worked on the network side of sports. He has worked for Activision Blizzard, a massive gaming company that has gotten up to a lot of jackassery in its treatment of employees, and is currently in the process of either being bought by Microsoft or having that transaction blocked by
landmark antitrust.
Yeah, big antitrust case going on there. So, hey, maybe he's a little bit familiar with antitrust, which is going to be something that is going to be very important for every conference commissioner in the next couple of years. But Richard, when we talked about this in the hours before it came out that he was going to be the commissioner, you had been expressing the view on this show that the Big Ten was going to go a little bit more college sports club member than disruptor business guy. And it seems like they settled to me kind of somewhere in the middle. Like, he's been in very explicit for-profit jobs like Oresco was when he was the CBS Sports top programming executive before going to the American. But I think a lot of his bona fides for this job were that he had worked on college sports specific media deals. So I'm curious what you think his hiring signals about the Big Ten / tell me whether it means they're adding Oregon and Washington or not.
Yeah, they're adding Oregon and Washington tomorrow. No, I think that the big thing about Tony Petitti is you ask what his hire kind of signifies or something to that effect. First of all, one of his kind of big bona fides claims to fame was in the late 90s while he was working for ABC Sports, was key in kind of brokering the BCS, like creating the BCS. I think that, look, you could talk about what the BCS was and not liking it, whatever. it was landmark when it happened.
You were too young.
And
you were too young to remember that war.
I understand that, but at the end of the day, if you helped get 100-year-old sport to come to some kind of consensus on something it had never done before, there's something to be said for that.
Dan Wetzel, Wetzel, I know you're listening. Get his ass.
Sure, whatever. Dan, ask Pat for my number. And I think that at the end of the day, what Tony has is what I think is going to be key for every big conference commissioner kind of moving forward, which is the knows the media biz, thing on his resume. My biggest question about Tony Petitti, and it's about George Kliavkoff, and it's about Brett Yormark, and is this job a 25-year job anymore, or is it a 5-year job anymore? Like, how long do you think Tony Petitti is going to do this? And I'm not saying Tony Petitti is going to do this badly. Like, I don't think you can say, and I know people are going to talk about COVID when you bring up Kevin Warren, like, COVID aside, Kevin Warren changed college sports and was here for like 4 years.
Is the COVID thing really the number one?
Oh, dude, yeah. I wouldn't say the COVID thing is number one, but I do think if you don't like Kevin Warren, it's the number one. That I can say. So, you can do a lot in a few years and then move on. I don't know if George Kliavkoff is going to be in that job for the long term. That's a speculation and a guess.
Richard, there won't be that job in the long term.
But I do, I think it was actually at Georgia's title celebration. Greg Sankey spoke and sort of kind of made this point too.
Took a shot.
How long?
Took a shot.
Yes. How long are these posts going to be held? What is Tony? And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. It's just one of the things that I think with this new guard of conference commissioners, I just start thinking about.
Yeah,
I think about it too. And there's not yet a ton of evidence to this effect. Obviously Kevin Warren was in and out. Larry Scott was sort of in and out, but that was because he sucked. Not necessarily, it's not clear to me that he wanted to leave. But I tend to think that the John Swaffords, Jim Delaney's, Mike Slives are probably not the way of the future, though. I think Greg Sankey is a long-time college sports administrator type. It'll be interesting because, can I say why I think this is worth talking about? The reason that I find this to be an interesting topic of conversation beyond just, industry hardball about like, oh, who's going to have power, who's not, is if you don't view this stuff long term, like if you think you're going to be in this job for 5 to 10 years, it's going to affect how you're going to make decisions. Like it's going to change the way you do your job. And I would have to make up on the spot how that would happen. But for
sometimes it means you make bolder decisions, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you don't have to deal with the aftermath, you can sort of drop the bomb and back and move out.
Yeah.
I think that every other position in the industry is moving towards a shorter shelf life. Head coaches are not doing this thing where I coached 2 generations, right? I coached your daddy. That's gone.
That's the most clear. That's the clearest kind of.
That's gone
view.
away.
But it's happening with ADs too, Godfrey.
So Richard,
I was talking
I was about to go there. I don't know if you can find ADs that do that anymore.
And I was talking to an associate AD at a Power 5 school about a week or so ago about that. Like we was talking, I was like, man, do you want an AD job? Like, you're a really good fundraiser at the school you're at right now.
Right.
It's a fairly cushy job. Do you want an AD job that you're going to be fired in 2.5 years? Y'all want to sit in the seat. Y'all want to sit in the chair, but the chair's changing.
All right. What about this? Just to wrap this up. If every job is shortening, that might be an advantage for ADs, because what we know is this: at most schools, we have to make a lot of coaching hires, but coaching hires that are paid attention to, where money is sort of won and lost at the revenue sports, right? Let's just say hypothetically in 5 years, you have to make at least 3 to 4 major coaching changes, hires, right? Baseball.
I think you,
right?
I think you're overestimating how many coaching hires really matter.
Okay. All right. Well,
for an 80s job.
All right. So let's take it down a notch then. Here's my point. We know the hit rate, the success rate on hirings. The longer you're at an institution, the lower your average is going to become.
Right.
So if you're an AD and you're a business-minded individual, which all of these people now come from corporate and fundraising backgrounds, there is no more, he played left tackle here. Then after he got done with law school,
Godfrey makes an important point. Godfrey, I want to interject with. Sorry to interrupt, but this is an important
the good
point.
Old boys thing?
No. Well, that's always been true, but I think that how like offensive coordinator and QB coach is the stepping stone to head coach.
Right.
The AD version of that is assistant or associate AD development fundraising.
Usually, yeah. Usually,
and
like J-Bat.
And that may change too. This was actually, it's funny you bring that up, Alex, because that was kind of the crux of the conversation that I was having with this associate who was like, yeah, I am on the classic track, like you're saying, to being an AD, but schools may start thinking about their own media rights and trying to bring some back, all that kind of stuff. So maybe the AD chair changes to look a little bit more like the conference commissioner chair in that some of the resume requirements may spin more understanding of the media biz, understanding of the television business, that sort of stuff. There are
a few ex-SIDs at the highest levels. There are a few. Scott Strickland's one.
Yeah.
I mean, off the top of my head, I know a couple who were SIDs who have media comms backgrounds, but
Auburn's got a former baseball coach.
I would sort of put, Auburn's always an outlier, Alex. I don't know about in-house media rights because I don't know what you could put back until the next, in the next 20 years, what you could take back under your wing. I think having corporate, there might be a shift away from getting the good old boy to write the check to put the name on the building and more corporate finance backgrounds of saying like, hey, we're in East Texas or whatever, and Ford is a big name. I'm just pulling these out of thin air. Let's develop a relationship with them. So if you worked at a Learfield, in fact, I know this, or like an IMG, all of that all that corporate side stuff that went on, it's kind of undergoing a revolution quietly underneath all of this. Like who sells the advertising in your stadium? Having that background might actually be stronger than having a good grip and grin fundraisers background to becoming the next like sort of AD du jour.
Yeah, that's a tremendous point, and it'll be worth following how that job changes or doesn't in the next couple of years, couple of decades. Probably take even more time to figure it out. Quickly going through more news of the week here, fellas. I love it when a legacy figure returns to a program, like when a coach goes back for round two, when like a beloved program figure goes back for round two. Like, it's why I thought it was so cool when Randy Edsall went back to UConn, for instance. I think that it is awesome that Kliff Kingsbury, after that decorated tenure at USC, where he was from December 2018 to January 2019. So that was parts of 2 years that he was in that job.
Yeah.
And he's gone back to be the offensive coordinator or the quarterback's coach for Lincoln Riley. I mean, what a homecoming. Will he be welcomed with a ticker tape parade?
Bottle service, isn't that the same thing in Hollywood?
They do the thing, the thing where they like bring the bottles out and like they have the sparklers in them, and they bring the big sign.
I know white girls.
That's how I imagine he was greeted at LAX when he got home. I
think that the only thing to take away from this, honestly, is that in a world of Sabans and in a world of Belichick's, be a Kliff. I don't think we're breaking any news here, and that Kliff could have easily gone into the Patriots or even maybe the Alabama factory system of career rehabilitation, which at this point I think it's established media narrative that it's boot camp and they treat you like shit and you reform your career maybe, or you're Bill O'Brien, one of those two. Instead, my guy was just like, you know what? I've been an NFL head coach. I've been a Power 5 head coach. I developed Patrick Mahomes, Super Bowl winning MVP. Like, I'm just going to enjoy life. I'm going to have a hand and a foot in football at one of the premier institutions. It's not like he's at Cal Poly right now. Like, the dude is going back to USC.
That's a good school. That's a good school, Steven.
San Luis Obispo is one of the greatest cities in America. That stands for
Polytechnic.
I wouldn't know that. I got kicked out of Ole Miss. Kliff is not like going away. This is a premier job, technically. It's just not a miserable one. By the way,
If anything,
like you're hanging out with
going to-
Lincoln Riley. Like,
Yeah, he's going to work with the homie.
Yeah.
Like he's coaching quarterbacks for Lincoln Riley with not for with Lincoln Riley. I mean, it's cool.
Yeah, the boys are back in town. This is Entourage season 9.
Also, by the way, we don't know this. Maybe this is the path to restarting your career successfully.
Yeah,
Like, or maybe you just can't win 8 or 9 games every year at freaking Texas Tech. And like, we don't know if going and grinding it out for Belichick or grinding it out for Saban would have necessarily bore riper fruit for Kliff in 5 years. But I do know this: Kliff gets to live his life. By the way, Google Kliff Kingsbury. Real fast. Let's do a little role play. You're Kliff Kingsbury. You look like Kliff Kingsbury. I'm going to spend my life as Kliff Kingsbury going out in Beverly Hills.
You remember when he was
doing LA
at
things?
Tech?
Hint and wink.
You remember when he was at Tech? There was like a thing about how they were gonna like GQify like his look and like all this kind of stuff. I swear to God, look that up. There was like a thing about Texas Tech like making him like his image and like all this sort of stuff. It's funny you bring that up.
If you know in the industry about Kliff and his homies, he's very happy to be in LA. If I was Kliff Kingsbury and I was richer than 4 foot up a bull's ass and I kind of had a job for one of my friends, like I kind of have a job, like a 3-day-a-week job, and then you get in there on Saturday and you just tell Caleb like, hey, try shallow cross instead.
Right.
And then also I got to be Kliff Kingsbury and then live in Los Angeles. Y'all, I can only intone and wink so hard before my eye rolls out of my head.
Like to be him
Kliff,
and to recruit and to like even his recruiting. Kliff Kingsbury recruiting us is like call some 17-year-old and say, hey, you know, we could do plays, but you just want to meet me at the beach. You just want to meet me at the beach. Yeah, how's she doing? Yeah, like
how's your mom?
Yeah, so here's the 3 plays that I call.
Put your mom on the phone.
Here's the 3 plays that I call. You're going to have 1,500 yards and you're going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. It's a good life, as good a life as you can have as a football coach. Quickly, though, some house announcements, things going on. Want to tell you about Home Field Apparel. Again, Richard said it, podcasting and visual medium. I think I see a couple of Home Field shirts on our recording right now. I've got an actual home field shirt on. Godfrey, you're ponying up by the looks of it. Am I seeing that shirt right?
Go Broncos.
Oh, that's for a moment there. I thought I saw SMU, but that is, now that you pull it up, I see that is Idaho and that is a Bronco rather than a Mustang. Thank you, Stephen, for clarifying. Home Field's got both, as well as dozens of other programs in their collection. They've got Split Zone Duo shirts in their collection. Just Google Split Zone Duo Home Field. It will come right up. You can use the promo code SZD20 for 20% off your first order. Or if you want 25% off your first order, you can, or off any order, actually, I should say, you can download their app, and every day they are doing a shirt of the day that they hand select that is 25% off. So it's a tremendous deal. And the value that you will find at Home Field will only be expanded when you actually put the stuff on and feel how comfortable it is and feel what a conversation starter it can be with everybody in your life. Over on the Split Zone Duo Patreon at splitzoneduo.com, we actually have a pretty big couple of weeks coming up. I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately, kind of leading up to a busy end of this month. But Richard, you have an exciting pre-NFL draft item coming, a fan favorite, do you not, in the next couple of days?
Yeah, going to get the boys, Ben Solak and Derek Klassen on to talk about the quarterback class as we get as we get near to the NFL draft coming up next week. Thank God it's next week.
Thank God that it's here. Thank God that it's over. I'm going to go with the latter, not the former.
Yes. There's that. And then we will do also probably on the back half of next week, do one of our not one of, but the kind of new scheme series that we've been kicking around in the hopper. We have a project title for it that may just end up being the actual title for it.
It is.
So watch that space next week, because I don't feel like naming anything, and naming things suck.
Pretty terrible. SplitZoneDuo.com. We may or may not have an informative piece about a coach in the SEC, Alex.
Yes, coming soon. That'll be on the Split Zone Duo Patreon, patreon.com/SCD or splitzoneduo.com. Fellas, let's go from Los Angeles to the Great White North. The only NCAA football team. Good one. The only NCAA team that plays football in Canada, not the only college football team, but the only NCAA football team in Canada, is shutting down or on the verge of shutting down. There's a fight happening about it right now. And I want to talk about it because I am concerned about what it says, not just about Canadian college football, but about the current landscape of American college football. So this school is Simon Fraser University there in Burnaby, British Columbia, very close to Vancouver.
I know it well.
Do you know it well?
No, fuck no.
I could have believed it. You're a snowboarder. You could have gone to Whistler or something in British Columbia. You could know Simon Fraser. I wouldn't doubt you. But anyway, they're a Division II institution. They are very, very close to Vancouver and thus, only a couple hours drive from Seattle and kind of the upper reaches of the Pacific Northwest. And they have for many years now played Division II college football with NCAA classification and NCAA opponents. They have had some geographic struggles in actually putting on this football program in recent years because there are just very few Division II teams in not only Canada, where there are 0 other NCAA teams of any kind, but in the Western United States in general. Now, there are teams in New Mexico. There are a bunch in the Rocky Mountain Athletic in Colorado. There's a nice chunk of them in Nebraska and the Dakotas. But then that's almost entirely it. The only exceptions when you get westward of the Rockies are Central Washington, Western Oregon, and Simon Fraser. Those are the 3 Division II Western schools in all of NCAA D2. And in 2021, all 3 of these schools made an affiliate membership deal to play football in the Lone Star Conference. Godfrey, guess which state most of the teams in the Lone Star Conference play in?
I was thinking of a joke, but Texas.
And is that close to Canada?
Spiritually, yes, but geographically, no.
Thank you, Stephen. The 3 Northwestern schools previously had been playing in the Great Northwest Athletic Conference, but then all of the other football playing schools in that conference either stopped playing football or left over time. So there was a marriage of convenience to be had for these 3 Northwestern schools, including Simon Fraser in Canada, to go and play with these Texans and some Arkansans and some others in that area because they had no home and they had nobody near them and no schools nearby that they could play in Division II without a huge travel burden. So they make this agreement. These 3 schools go, and the Lone Star had lost some members. Like Texas A&M Commerce has now gone up to FCS after winning a D2 national championship. Abilene Christian, UIW, long ago left this conference. They're now playing in FCS as well. Marriage of convenience. And now the Lone Star says that they do not want this Canadian school, Simon Fraser, anymore. They didn't kick out the other 2. They didn't kick out the Oregon and the Washington school, but they kicked out the Canadian one. I gather something about the added distance and fuss of Canadian travel when you're a D2 football program. And the response of Simon Fraser has just been to shut the program down. And I think I get it because there's just nobody near them to play anymore for more than a few games a year, assuming you get those other 2 schools in non-conference. It's a ton of travel and it's Division II football. Matt Brown in Extra Points is a very good newsletter that you should check out, notes that there are Canadian college football teams outside of the NCAA that are not far away. And in theory, they could play them. But there are governance issues, classification issues with playing NCAA teams against non-NCAA teams and with having some sports in the NCAA and some not. Apparently, the NCAA would not be cool with that. The Canadian authorities, college sports authorities would not be cool with that. So you have this football team that is stuck in this kind of mess. And I think everyone wants something to be done. There are some Simon Fraser alums who are suing to try to block the school from eliminating the team. I'm not sure that's going to work. The owner of the BC Lions in the CFL, a guy named Amar Dorman, says that, quote, if there's a check to be written, end quote, and he won't disclose numbers, but, quote, you've got a good network starting with Mr. Dorman here that will support it, end quote. A lot of people mad, but we're just going to have to wait and see. This guy says that taking out a college football team is like taking out NATO, like attacking NATO. You hit one university, you hit them all.
Absolutely the same thing. Yes, totally.
Yes. The same plan, same thing.
Very similar cases. But the thing about this that sucks, and thank you for bearing with me as I kind of do this several minute narration of what's happened here,
to the Mac,
is that the reason the program is shutting down, as far as I can tell, is that there are no options for who to play if you are a Division II football team. And this is a problem in general if you're below FBS and you are trying to find opponents in the western part of the United States, and they're just not there to be played. Like the Big Sky exists, and the Big Sky is essential. you have the Utah schools that we just mentioned who have now moved to the WAC ASUN UAC conference. You have San Diego in the non-scholarship Pioneer League, and they've done quite well, but it's still a non-scholarship small program situation there. It's not a place that can give scholarships to football players. You've got some D3 schools, but same deal. And so what worries me about this...
He's saying San Diego, by the way, obviously not San Diego State. It's the Toros. It's a Catholic,
yes.
Small Catholic school.
Great city. Great location.
I think the Toreros, the USD Toreros.
Toros?
I think it's the USD Toreros, and yeah, I'm correct. And Jim Harbaugh used to be
Harbaugh was
at
there,
that school
yeah.
a long time ago. So this is what sucks, is that there's just so few. The reason this Canadian team is shutting down is that there are so few teams that they could possibly play. And I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg here that like college football has declined in the American West. So the teams have gone away, or teams have gone away. And as a result, there's been less high school participation in California, which is the thing we've talked about on this show before. California has bled high school football participation in recent times.
Yes.
But it's grim. I mean, obviously it's grim for the players at this program, who I think are going to have their scholarships honored at least. But it's grim that if you are not talking FBS, and you're just a player in the Western United States who's looking for a place to maybe continue their football career and get some money to go to college, that there are just so few options. And you've seen one effect of that, which is that this team in Canada has sort of been stranded and is no longer playing football.
Everybody keeps laughing at me about losing the national identity of the sport. And you're listening to a story about a D2 school in Canada, and you're going to keep laughing, and you're going to shrug it off. This sport is receding. Okay? The lake is getting lower geographically. Just a fact. I'm not saying that's the SEC or the Big Ten's fault, but I'm telling you it's happening. We see this every single year. I don't want to spoil what we're about to talk about. I just wrapped up my annual Coach Gossip Athlon thing, Pac-12 conversations, with nothing to do with the Los Angeles schools going to the Big Ten, ostensibly, were dire. Although that's definitely a reason why things are dire. It is harder and harder and harder to be a college program in the West. It just is.
We talked about this last week on Patreon. We mentioned Patreon earlier, but we talked about where to put a program if you were going to build a program. I intentionally did not build a program in California.
Yeah, we tried to give Richard UC Riverside.
Yeah, I was like, no.
And Richard went with Wichita.
Yeah, like I went with Wichita State in Kansas. Like you're just closer to football players, man. And you're just closer to kind of diamond in the rough football players, which was kind of the crux of that argument. Can this situation specifically be both? And it's, dude, they're in Canada, man.
Okay.
Like I'm not saying, I don't think you guys are wrong. I do not disagree with the assessment of the situation. They're also in Canada.
Yes.
And
that's why they got booted, and the school in Washington didn't, and the school in Oregon did it, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Also, sure. COVID was a nightmare in so many regards, but border crossing, not easy in Canada. Virtually impossible.
And that's what I'm talking about. They're I know that they're close to Vancouver as far as they're a metro area. Like they're not in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It's still 3 hours from Seattle, man. Like it's not right there.
I get that. Yes. I don't want to step past the Canadian aspect of this on my way to preaching about the decline of football in the West. The Canadian, the Canadian aspect of this is why this program fell. I just don't think it's limited to the fact that they are a Canadian program. If this was a Canadian program that was in Hamilton, Ontario, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
No, you could be right about that.
Or Windsor, where you're literally, depending on traffic on the gates and bridges, you're a half hour from Detroit or whatever. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
The Big Sky is a crucial bulwark right now for having non-FBS, smaller college football in the West Coast. We need the Big Sky to succeed. the Big Sky is carrying the hopes and dreams. I'm only half kidding, of like an entire class of like high school, like an entire tier of high school football talent in the Western United States. Like these players need places to continue their careers. And there are just fewer and fewer. I went through a list of all of the Western programs that used to exist that don't anymore. And it's kind of depressing. Like it's several Cal States, several UC schools, including UC Riverside, both San Francisco and Santa Clara in NorCal, Gonzaga and Portland. This was in the 40s, but I didn't even realize that. I think I knew Gonzaga had one many decades ago.
And remember, some of that is the California schools themselves having their heads up their asses. Remember, some of these schools down there, we're talking about Riverside. You mentioned Poly earlier, and look, I get my UCs confused once we get past LA, but they shuttered football because of lack of interest in 1975.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not talking about 2 years ago, or during COVID thing. Like, there was already a permeating lack of interest below the schools in California that you can name 40 years ago.
Okay.
Now, Richard's point is well taken that it's not new. This has been developing for a while, but it's a precarious situation. And
this is the funny thing is, go look at what Stanford Stadium used to look like. And Stanford's not a great example for anything in FBS because it's Stanford. But yeah, go look at what Stanford Stadium used to look like, and go look at a very famous football game that was played in that stadium that was not a college football game, by the way.
Can you give us a preview of what we're talking about?
It's like a trivia question.
It's a trivia question. Go look it up.
All right. Well, then we are going to come back to it.
Crazy.
Okay. We're going to come back to it on next week's program. Let's stay in the getting Western United States, but not quite the Western United States. Richard, you made a trip in this past week, my understanding is, to Lincoln, Nebraska, where you broke bread with Matt Rule, the new head coach of the Cornhuskers. And
did you eat with him?
I ate.
I hope Matt Rule's eating.
Alex said broke bread, so I was just like, it's
one of those. So there's a couple of ways these kind of visits go. And one of them is like the night before you break bread, figuratively or literally, with the coach who you are on the visit to see. Mm-hmm. So on, the day in question, I went and we did the whole, official media thing, sat in his office, turned the recorder on, did the interview. But the night before, with a couple of his staffers who I know, we went out and had a beverage.
I went out with Dana Holgerson at Houston, and the next day's meeting got rescheduled for five
weather,
because you had beverages.
I just had the one. It was the size of a phone booth.
Sure.
Richard, did you have a Runza? And then I have a question I want to ask you, a serious one.
What is a Runza?
I went past Runza. What's the deal there?
We are not making friends right now. I know a lot of Midwesterners are going to yell. I've never been in Nebraska. I'm sorry.
It's like a Hot Pocket with good fillings in it. It's popular. Just trust me. It's very popular. Right. Nebraskans, I know you. I get you, even if these guys don't.
That's because you're from pepperoni roll country.
But anyway, Richard, so you go to Lincoln, and one of the things that I would wonder about is it already clear from spending just a little bit of time with Matt Rule that there are differences in how Nebraska is running now compared to how it ran under their gruesomely failed head coach Scott Frost of the last few years?
I think the thing with Nebraska is I would not say Nebraska's back of house needed really to be shipshape, right? I think that they were okay as far as program infrastructure, NIL stuff. Like that was in an okay place. What wasn't was the legitimate football infrastructure over the last couple years. Now, Matt Rule comes into this job obviously in December. You talk to people in Nebraska, they are bullish about the infrastructure because like they don't have any debt famously, like that's kind of their thing. I think culturally, Nebraska sits, not the state, the university of, sits between eras, but not as bad as it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. I think the more you get removed from, and we talked the Frank Solich thing, we talked about the Frank Solich thing a couple weeks ago. I think the more you get removed from your most recent high-level success, which is Frank Solich's run at the Rose Bowl when they lost to Miami in the national championship game, Eric Crouch, Heisman, et cetera, the more you get removed from that, the more you can kind of be removed from that, which I know sounds dumb, but, the more you could kind of say, that was our past. We don't have to directly always reference our past. But Matt Rule's no dummy, man. Like Matt Rule, we sat there and we talked, and I don't know if this is going to make the story, but like Matt Rule was like, yeah, I met with Coach Osborne, Tom Osborne, who still lives in the area and is around, and here are his notes that I took from our conversation about how they run practice.
He's kissing babies. He's shaking hands.
Right. Like Matt Rule gets there and one of his longtime assistants, Ed Foley, who's a special teams coach, went on like a whistle stop tour of the entire state. And Matt, one of the first things Matt Rule did, like in the beginning of December when he took this job, is go down the street to Lincoln High School. And it's funny because you can, from that high school, because I went and grabbed coffee at a coffee shop right next to that high school, you can see Memorial Stadium from that high school. And there was a tweet from the principal of that high school in the beginning of December that says, glad someone in the office found our address. Love talking to Matt Rule for a few minutes.
Shit. Man.
I think there is something to be said for the last staff was maybe to Nebraska in the sense that they took for granted some of their relationships. They took for granted some of their ties. And that's not the only thing Scott Frost did wrong. It's not the only reason why they didn't win a lot of games. But as far as a cultural perspective is concerned, Matt Rule is the specific kind of outsider, I think that, and remember, this is April stuff.
Yeah.
We haven't kicked the ball yet.
Nope.
We haven't hit anybody yet. This is the kind of stuff that Matt Rule is specifically designed, the type of battles Matt Rule is specifically wired to win in this part of the year. Now, remember, Matt first got to Baylor, right? He is as far from Baylor culturally, and I'm not talking about what happened at Baylor. I'm talking about like Baylor is in Texas, and Matt Rule is not a
Texan Baptist. Yes,
no twang.
The first thing Matt Rule does is buddy with the Texas High School Coaches Association president. He hires Joey McGuire and a couple other very key Texas high school influencers and says, I'm going to appeal to the Texas high school coaches. I need to get players. Yeah, man. Good idea, dude.
So,
he's still the hat, the Texas High School Coaches Association hat that he wore on a Thursday night football broadcast when the Panthers went and played the Texans. That was on his desk or on his bookshelf behind him when we were sitting there talking.
I'm curious about this. For Matt Rule's sake, obvious, like, congrats, you're in Texas. It's very obvious why you have to do the retail politics and you have to get in with the high school coaches. And of course, you have to do that anywhere you are, like even if it's Nebraska, where it's hard at this point to sustain a program based on local talent. But it's still April, as you mentioned. What has Matt Rule done in the opening weeks, months that you think makes the best case that Nebraska will be more competent under his leadership? Is it just that he's winning the press conferences and he's doing a good job winning hearts and minds? Or is there something about like the way that he has effectuated whatever his plans might be?
Well, one of the things that I think he's really, really insistent on is practice. He's a big practice guy. Like, so there's a lot of programs that play music at practice on speakers. Like this is a thing now, right? We play music at practice. The kids all like it, all that kind of stuff. And everybody's doing this. Even some schools you wouldn't think of. And like Matt Rule, like turned the music off like halfway through practice. It was like, turn that off. I'll tell you guys when I want it turned on. And this insistence about practice was a thing that I was told, not by Matt, but by some other people around the program, that like Scott Frost, they weren't tackling. They weren't like going to the ground. And that was like a big thing. And that was like a thing of like, oh, we're not tough anymore, like all that kind of stuff. Some of that stuff is misnomer. They're not really tackling the NFL much, as far as like a padded practice kind of thing. So some of that is misnomer, some of that is reputation stuff. But as far as like what's a bona fide to think like, like he's come in and changed this thing and run this thing a little bit differently. Like that's a thing where you come in and you say, okay, this thing's in some ways operating a little bit differently. Again, we have not kicked the ball yet.
Sure.
We have not played it down yet.
Sure.
They could go 4-8 next year. I'm not saying they won't, but this is the kind of stuff that, as far as April stuff is concerned, this is April stuff. And you go and you have these conversations and you talk to these programs and you talk to these coaches and you sit down and you assess where the situation is right now.
Godfrey,
Alex. Yes.
We have talked at length about why Nebraska can never again be what it was. But one of the things that Trev Alberts, I think the AD there has tried to recalibrate is less talk about Nebraska relative to what it was and more talk about why can't Nebraska be one of the better upper middle class programs in the Big Ten, occasionally win 10 games in a year. I mean, hell, the playoff is going to be 12 teams soon. Why couldn't you some year flirt with the bottom reaches of the playoff bracket? And so I would ask you, do you believe that that kind of vision is, because I do, I think it's reasonable. And I'm curious if you are on an optimistic Nebraska posture right now for that or not, or if you think that it's even possible to kind of get that fan base to think that way in terms of what you could be rather than what you were.
You ready? You guys ready?
No, I'll never be ready.
Nebraska's back. Here's where I'm coming from with this. And I'm saying this earnestly. Are they back in the sense that they're going to beat an SEC team in the national title by 30 odd points? Probably not. But
wow, deep cut. That's a wound.
Weren't you in the womb?
That was too.
Okay.
Spencer was there, by the way.
Yes.
In the band.
Yeah. I was in high school. Like, that's called age and generation. People walk the earth before you do. Nebraska and NIL that's all I heard when I was doing the Big Ten gossip roundup. It was about a week ago. I was finishing my phone calls and I had a coach who's a veteran, a veteran Big Ten assistant say, you're going to laugh. And I would have laughed 2 years ago to say this at all, but I think they're going to come back. And I said, well, we didn't even try and context what back means. I just let him cook. And he was saying that it's now apparent they were building Trev. I'm complimenting Trev. I mean, this dude, I'm really walking into a strange land here. So let's all hold hands together. Trev was building financially for this. I think it makes all the sense in the world now that the powers that be at Nebraska looked around at the landscape in 2019, 2020, when NIL's sort of hazy future was unveiled and said, all right, boys, one thing that we can do, you know how we're the team that sells out every game regardless, and we let the balloons out and we're the biggest city in Nebraska on game day and all that stuff. We can prove that financially. And so with NIL, what I am now hearing, not from people in Big Red, but all of the opposition is sort of an exasperated side and oh shit, and they've got an NIL machine. Now, when you couple that, go ahead, Richard. All right, go ahead. We'll figure out the second part.
Because you're here, because you're hitting on this, I sort of want to give people the picture of like what we're talking about as far as like a donor base and like where's this money is coming from. Like, folks, they don't go to the stadium on the tractors. Like it. Once you get west of Omaha, or Lincoln, yes. Once you get west of Lincoln, all right, I'll give it to you. We get kind of bleak in a hurry. I understand that.
I think it's pretty. Like, don't be a dick. I think Wichita's a beautiful place.
But
emo.
Lincoln and Omaha specific. Lincoln's got like 400,000 people.
Yes,
like it's it is a mid-sized city, I guess, if you want to call it that. Yes. Omaha, you will note, like the richest guy in the world, one of the richest guy in the world, runs a fairly notable company that has beget a lot of other fairly notable companies. Yeah. Like there's a lot of money in that. And remember, Nebraska does still, hey, look, this is a for better or for worse kind of thing. Nebraska does still, because of what it was 70s, 80s, 90s, only show in town, only show on TV, before TV changed and all that kind of stuff. They do have a level of sidewalk fandom that, I'm not talking Notre Dame, but they have a level of sidewalk fandom.
Yes.
It is fair to say that.
Yes.
So they do have a donor base that I think maybe is surprisingly national in scope. I think it's probably the way to say it.
Back when you were two and they still had that identity, it was a program. And this is why I say this to always set up a joke, but I'm not joking right now. Why representation matters is that like poor farm families identified with Nebraska football for like 30 and 40 and 50 years. Was that because most of their offensive line was white? Yes, there is cultural identity in seeing. I mean, yeah, when you see your race represented, it's also like that's the same reason why when black families across the Southeast saw Michael Irvin and Dion with a star in their helmet, like this is how things work in America, guys. Okay, like we could talk about baseball and the Latin population. Like this is how it works. This is how self-identification works. This is how representation works. It's just a little sort of like you have grit your teeth and talk about white people, but like Nebraska was in the Great Plains states representative of the Great Plains values. This is why Osborne went into politics, and I'm painting with a broad brush. All of that will still translate to check writing if there is some competency. Mm-hmm. And number two, there is an admission by someone who Big Red respects, who says, it is time to look forward. And I can't believe I'm saying this. Trev seems to be the man who is realizing what Nebraska can do instead of what it should have been. Now, the number two thing, Richard, is what you just experienced. Because when we were doing the early first leg of Gossip Cycle last fall, you were joking. You're like, man, y'all love some Matt Rule, right? It was a joke. You've spent time with him. Yeah. Do you get it now? And it's not that I personally have affinity for Matt. He's fine. I think he's a really nice dude. What Matt does better than any coach I've ever seen in the 20 odd years I've been doing this is without cultural context or connection. So like normal people walk into a room and they try and find a connection on a personal level. Hey, Richard, you're from Florida. Well, you know what? I'm actually from Georgia. Or, hey, I went to an SEC school. Like, that's how we usually build bridges. Or we're this religion.
Especially in college football.
Exactly. We're from this place. You're of this religion or whatever it is. Or, hey, I know this guy. What is so uncanny about Matt Rule is his ability with no connection whatsoever to walk in and establish personal relationships that are essentially unmoored. And it breaks a lot of pretext, a lot of silent codes, Richard, that go on in this country. I've seen him do it at Temple. What he built at Temple doesn't get talked about enough because it was a shit pot of a program. And I'm not insulting the school. I'm talking about what they had spent on, they just had not dedicated anything to football. Okay? Just because you're in Philly doesn't guarantee anything. No. Then he goes in and creates the greatest, I don't know, cultural power washing. I mean, because the thing he does in Waco is that he goes back to player-led program and, hey, open communication channels, and also gets rid of the root of the Bryles thing was an entitlement stench. Like, not only can I do this heinous, horrible thing that's literally a crime, I can be enabled to, and they'll cover up on the back end. Rule has to win football games, 1, and 2, deprogram that. And he does, and they do. And that's what's so amazing. That's what's so amazing.
A thing that I think can be said for Matt Rule is Temple, Baylor, and you're about to see it in Carolina this season. By the way, I think Frank Reich and that staff, there's a lot of really good coaches on that staff.
Yeah.
Dude, the Panthers are probably going to make the playoffs this year. Like, the last 3 steps, Temple, Baylor, Panthers, he has built something that the next coach has taken and been able to keep the success of, right? Jeff Collins comes into Temple. Yeah. They keep winning. Dave Aranda comes into Baylor. They go to the Sugar Bowl, right? Like,
no joke. He's the anti-Petrino. Because that was always the joke that Petrino was. It wasn't a joke. It was just what coaches were like. Petrino's going to give you an 11-win season. He's going to leave, and you're going to walk into a room filled with marauders who aren't going to listen to you, and you'll have to burn it down and start with your freshman class in 2 years. And what Matt does is the opposite. Richard, I would argue, as sort of the NFL expert here, don't you think now that he was wasted in the NFL?
Man,
because you don't have to go to a high school in Charlotte.
The Panthers thing is a lot. Like the Panthers thing is another podcast for another day. There's a lot. There's a lot there.
Yeah, because it's the NFL. It's just a different rule set.
It's ownership. Yeah. It's. I don't even really want to do that. It is a lot. But I think the crux of this is Nebraska is different because I don't think Nebraska is. Well, I know Nebraska is not the smoking crater Baylor was, and I don't think it's the shitpot, as you said, that Temple was when he got there. Like,
no, it wasn't Temple, but we know what Nebraska hasn't been.
Sure. Now, Nebraska has not had a good 5 or 6 years, and they've stunk through that. But you can win at Nebraska with a base level of competency. And Alex, it's where we come back to your point.
We got to just say the thing. This is the kind of program I want to have. We are stabbing the corpse of Scott Frost. So let's just say we're doing it. Like, this guy clearly now was not the competent Osborne successor heir that anyone thought he would be. Let's just go ahead and say this because we're doing it in a roundabout way.
Oh yeah, yes,
yeah,
agree,
okay,
totally.
Okay, I just I don't want to tiptoe around it. It's just like it's clear now from an administrative, structural, management level. Like, you don't end up with Northwestern smoking your ass with their offense, like in a week 0 game without a million management issues that led to that point. And it's not just like we needed to get better players. That's just not the way to look at that era.
Remember, I do want to say this. He is getting the band back together, by the way, as far as staffing is concerned. So
go on.
Well, I'm saying a lot of these guys, coaching staff, front of house and back of house guys, are guys who have been with him.
I think that's more important. When you say front of house, you're talking about not coaching roles, right?
Yes.
That's more important. Sort of, honestly, I think that's okay, and that's more important because, as you know, when he gets on-field staffers, they're very bespoke to the environment, like McGuire was.
But this is kind of where I was going with that. So when we talk about guys who are bespoke to the environment, right? You needed guys who were bespoke to Texas because you're in Texas.
Yes.
And you need to recruit Texas. Now, the shaking hands, kissing baby stuff in the state of Nebraska is great and it's important. How many players are you really pulling?
Right. Thank you, Richard. This is what I was trying to ask earlier.
Yeah,
exactly.
But Tom knew that too.
No. And I'm not trying to disagree with you. Yeah. I'm kind of setting up the state of play here.
Yeah, Lawrence Phillips ain't from Kearney.
I'm just saying it's a little bit of a different deal. You're bringing the band back together, and he didn't grab Joey McGuire from Texas Tech. I'm saying some of these guys who have been with him, the object of the exercise is a little bit different than it was at Baylor when we get down to the nitty-gritty of assembling the roster, right?
Right.
That is still and I'm sure he's going to use Texas to do that. I'm sure he's going to use the state of Texas to do that. I'm just saying that is the challenge. That is the road to hoe, Alex.
It is. And look, Nebraska that's going to be a familiar challenge for Nebraska. That's been the issue since recruiting started to nationalize in the 80s and 90s, and particularly in the 2000s, really, when the internet started to take things over. That has flummoxed every Nebraska coach since the end of Osborne and Solich, and he will have to figure that out. But Godfrey, go ahead.
I just got to throw this in because they're screaming at you right now. One of the programs that nationalized college football recruiting was this program.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. They
when Tommy Frazier was not from Omaha.
Right. They got the corn-fed boys that were locals from the farm, and then they went out and got Tommy Frazier. They went out and they got the running backs and the receivers from Florida and from Los Angeles. They did that among the first. And not in a Catholic school way either. Yes, past tense, Richard. Yeah.
But that's the thing. And I think that's the point that he's making. It's a past tense thing. Nobody's saying Nebraska's nobody's discounting that aspect of Nebraska's past.
No.
Yeah.
We're talking about its future. We're talking about and its present, I should say.
Something that gives me optimism. Godfrey, you were talking earlier in the segment about how Nebraska's community support operation around NIL in particular looks like it's ready to go. How Trev Alberts has the money on the same page, and it seems like Nebraska is pulling in the same direction. That is an all-time Nebraska advantage. We talked about it at length on Dead Letters on the Patreon last year. Maybe we'll release that to the public at some point. But this goes back even to when Nebraska was building Memorial Stadium in the 1920s. And they had a fundraising drive that touched every single corner of the state because, again, Nebraska doesn't like to take out debt. Nebraska didn't have a lot of state legislative support. So Nebraska had quotas in every county and everyone met them. They had quotas for the businessman community of Lincoln that quota got met. They had state penitentiary inmates donating at Nebraska to get Memorial Stadium built. If you have an understanding of that history, I think it makes a lot more sense how you can look at Nebraska in a collective NIL world and think, oh yeah, like this is still the team of the state. They still have the sidewalk fans that Richard mentioned, and they're still going to be able to string together a few shekels when they need to get themselves whatever they need. Money's not going to be a problem in Nebraska. Organization is not going to be a problem in Nebraska. It's just running a football program and putting good players on the field and running good plays. That's been a problem in Nebraska. Maybe not anymore. And we'll see.
And Alex, the point here is like what and we talk of what's the ceiling a lot with a lot of these programs. I don't think anybody's sitting here saying with a straight face that Nebraska is ever going to compete with Ohio State for that level of recruitment.
I believe they've won their
Michigan doesn't.
I believe they have won their last national title, but that there are still good things for Nebraska to do in the sport.
How about this? Let me bridge all this. How about in a 12 team playoff world, what we're looking at is a reliable 8 seed, and who knows what happens in a bracket, right?
Yeah, so that is basically what the point I want to drill at. Here's the thing, though, and here's the thing that I think is going to. And I've made this point a lot on this podcast. The 12-team bracket is going to shape college football is going to change college football in a lot of ways in the band of team from 15 to 35.
Yeah.
Because it's not just those teams in the band of team from 15 to 35, because you've got like another 20 that think they should be in that band.
Yes.
And then anybody legitimately in that band with a couple ways that can break right can get into a 12-team dance. We're talking Kansas State. We're talking Utah. You know who we're talking about.
Yes.
So I think Nebraska squarely and understandably feels that it is between 15 and 35 right now. If you asked a credible Nebraska person with a straight face, where are you right now? You're probably in that at your highest level.
Right. And
when it's rolling.
And if there's go ahead.
Which means you can hop your way into a 12-team dance fairly easily. And I am not discounting that.
And then,
what I am saying
then you're
is
seated
that
opposite Utah in the first round, and things happen. You can win that game.
What I am saying is that there are going to be a lot of programs that becomes it's not a chasing of your own tail kind of thing. I think that becomes a sort of psychosis that is going to be interesting in how the sport changes at the coaching level. Because we see it in basketball, right? You go on an NCAA tournament run one time, you win 3 games, and you get a job.
So you're saying basically,
you know what I'm saying?
What you're saying basically is that a singular playoff bid is going to stay a lot of executions in the head coaching world.
Yes, I think that's one of the honestly nice things about the 12-teamer. I think it's gonna sort of cool the jets on some part of the silly season. We're still gonna fire plenty of coaches in this sport, but I think to an extent it's gonna kinda pump the brakes on some of the churn because there's still that carrot that's sitting there. Remember, nothing about the playoff, the future of the playoff has been billed as anything beyond participation. It's a participatory thing that we're expanding to 12.
TLDR, Big Red back, Big Red 8 seed. You heard it here first.